pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, folks, good evening. Thank you for joining us. We'll start with any declarations of conflict of interest. And I just want to highlight a couple things that, first of all, does anybody have any? Okay. As we get to old business, there is an addition for the commissioners on the agenda, and it'll be item B, which is the annual report. I apologize for it not being there, but we just want to make sure that we work through that because it is a document that for all of us, we should be endorsing to City Council. All right? So starting with old business remaining from November 14th, the public hearing, and this is a continuation of the Area 6 small plans, and I'll turn it over to city staff and we'll go ahead and proceed.
Hi there. So in your packets for this time, you received an updated small area plan amendment. So any of the text in green was things that we have since changed since the last meeting to include the additions to the revitalization as proposed by Mr. Pates, and then a few other changes throughout, just in an attempt to sort of clarify language relating to some of the other discussion. We can go over those in specific, or we can discuss also the analysis that was sent to you related to neighborhoods, to talk about, the conclusions that we reached there. Mr. Pates' amendments, I think there were two left that weren't fully discussed, and then we've also got some recommendations from Mr. Durham to discuss as well. But tomorrow is the formal end of the extension and time given by the City Council, and time for an action tonight is appropriate.
And Mr. Durham is present on the phone. Right, Dave? He was.
That's correct.
There we are.
There we go.
There he is. Okay.
Okay, so commissioners, I'll give you a little bit of opportunity to get settled there, sir. So I believe we've all had an opportunity to look over it, and at this particular time, I don't know if we need the staff to go back through it all for a recap, because we've been through this about 3 or 4 times at this point. And as stated, the highlighted areas where the changes are. So I think what we really want to do, and maybe what we'll do is we'll start with what Mr. Durham has sent in, and I'll just ask the commissioners before I go to Mr. Durham on the phone. Any other matters you see for change outside of what Mr. Durham has sent to us? No.
Going to go over his comments first?
Yeah.
I may have one as well.
Okay. So, Mr. Durham online, we have your 8, appears to be 7 changes. And I noticed that the last comment that you have here says you intend to move forward with the adoption of the staff's product with these revisions, which are 1 through 7. And I'll just open the floor to you if there's something you want to add in addition to what you've already sent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say that the staff product is quite good. So if you don't mind, I will quickly run through my recommendations. The first recommendation is just a correction throughout. There are different throughout the document. Sometimes maker district is capitalized, sometimes it's not. Sometimes just the word maker is capitalized. So my recommendation is throughout the document, except in titles, obviously, paragraph titles, that sort of thing. It should always be lowercase maker district. And then the second question, or the second point is on page stand by a second. On page 130 of the document, I'm sorry. All right.
I think he's meant 129.
Yeah. Page, in the paragraph that says T5M area core maker transect zone, at the last sentence says, this transect is often expressed through the creator maker zoning district. And so my question to staff was whether or not if creator maker is some sort of term of art, why we're not using that term throughout as a generic term. Instead of saying maker district, say creator maker district. So that's the first point. And I'm just gonna run through these, and then I'll let staff and other commissioners make comments afterwards, if that makes sense, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman.
Okay.
Okay, on page 183, I recommend the deletion of the words in the green text where it says residential neighbors have strong form, unique architectural character, etc. I recommend replacing the words must accommodate trends in infill development with an increase in modern housing sizes to say may conflict with current trends in infill development, including modern parentheses larger housing sizes. So I think that better characterizes the challenge that we face there. The next one is on page 184. This one's a pretty this one's a maybe more contentious, but I recommend deleting the very end of this bullet on the green bullet where it says, when property owners determine that additional regulations are appropriate for their neighborhood. And my comment there is I'm concerned about that language because I don't understand what set of property owners and what level of agreement within whatever that set is sufficient to trigger a corresponding planning process. As written, this seems fraught from my perspective for potential litigation from parties who may argue they were improperly restricted from participating in the process, or if they were participants, that their rights were abridged by the process. And so I recommend deletion of the phrase. In my opinion, in my considered opinion, I believe that it makes more sense for the city to have a policy that extends across the city to homeowners equally. I don't think it makes sense for neighboring property owners being able to determine whether or not these character books or these pattern books ought to apply on their street. If the city believes that pattern books to maintain the character of neighborhood are something that is a good policy, then it should be broadly applicable. Okay. The next one is also the same page. I would recommend the addition of a bullet there for solution that says, and my text is, create a transect that allows for the rehabilitation of non-conforming missing middle housing in areas of the city zoned R4. So in staff's memo that described the changes that they've made, they identify this as a problem that we have in Area 6 and, frankly, in Area 7. There are instances in areas that are zoned R4 where we have non-conforming uses of duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, et cetera. And if the city is concerned about maintaining a certain stock of missing middle housing or expanding that, then it would make sense that we have a policy that makes it easier for homeowners, property owners to rehabilitate those existing structures and not have them become obsolete because of some sort of perverse inability to rehabilitate those properties because they're quote unquote non-conforming, even though the zoning was overlaid those buildings well after they were built. On page 188, I recommend in the very first sentence where it says the Maker District is a policy toolkit, I recommend saying instead, the establishment of a Maker District or a Creator Maker District expands the city's policy toolkit. And that's just to make things a little more clear about what it is. I basically rewrote on page 194 the paragraph that talks about Mary Washington Hospital, PNC Bank, and James Monroe High School. You can see what I've written there. I think that just makes things more clear as to what I'm trying to say. So that's it. I'm happy to entertain any questions about my recommendations.
All right, so how about if we go with, any commissioners have any other comments to add to what Mr. Durham is presenting before we go to staff to kind of respond to a couple of these?
I was just gonna say that, with regard to the title of it says, well, when they talk about maker districts in Area 6, it's my understanding that the working group that is convened has developed a name, the Canal Corridor or something of that nature. That why would we not implement that here if we're gonna specifically talk about Area 6, if that's been an emphasis of that, community organization that has worked on it. I'd rather see us move forward with that. If that's what the will of the people is, then
I don't think we have any problem
Yep.
with that name being used from a marketing standpoint, but the idea is that we're trying to use sort of a more of a generic jargon, if you will, sort of a term of art, like you would say industrial district or residential district, that a maker district is intended to sort of imply a mixture of retail, creation, manufacturing, et cetera. It's not the downtown commercial district or the Central Park commercial district. It's not a name as to, I don't think it's appropriate that we use a name that is, quote, like Central Park or Celebrate Virginia or something that is specific in terms of a delineation, as opposed to the idea is substitute industrial district, substitute residential district, substitute. We don't talk about the Normandy Village residential district. We talk about a residential zoning district. So I think we can talk about the history of an area, and certainly as the area is marketed, it can be the Princess Anne Corridor, Creator Maker District. It can be the Canal Corridor, which is a perfectly fine designation.
right. I guess my point is that the community's already kind of coalesced around a title, so why not, if we're going to lean forward as we've leaned forward with using the term Maker District, why not actually use that for this specific area? I understand in different parts of town there might be other Maker Districts created, but if this is our first step and to get
We can certainly incorporate it by references so that it's clear. I just wouldn't want to lose the idea of it being a maker district. We can use it as an adjective. I mean, that's certainly appropriate.
So, Renee, I see where you're going. The only thing I would say is that even though the local community has indicated that that's something they want to do, they probably haven't done anything to formalize that term, and so there's probably some work that needs to be done before it, is actually a thing.
No, I think they.
So that's the only,
I think
that's
that
the only
they've
thing
gotten
I
that
thought.
part of it because they're moving on. I mean, there's another meeting tomorrow night, right, to work on other issues. Like they've identified people to come back with certain resources and stuff like that. I think that there's usually somebody here from the group, but I think that one's been pretty well defined. And that group is a cross section of residents, it's business owners, it's Main Street that's a part of that. So, I mean, I don't necessarily have a heartburn with that one. I get your point though, but I think that they're more along, they're more along with the development of that title.
I think that if we were to use that term, that it would be maybe one instance of it or something, artfully placed or strategically placed in the document, but throughout the document it should use a generic term of art. Either
Oh,
maker
oh,
district
agreed,
or
agreed. Everywhere else,
theater
I was only referring to specifically in the Maker Districts in Area 6. So I guess maybe just like on page 188. The rest of the document, totally, it would just say Maker District.
And, okay,
I understand.
Yeah, okay.
Under the, why a maker district here, we could say, group of residents, property owners, and potential business owners have been working and are proposing advancing the effort of the north side, canal corridor. We can put it in there.
Okay, Ms. Finn, you want to address comments from Mr. Durham?
So absolutely, number one, we will get all of those consistent maker district titles, not a problem. In thought to number two, I would rather that we eliminate the term creator from 129 rather than carry forward creator maker district throughout the whole thing. I think that is a
that's fine
remnant.
by me.
Sorry? Okay, sorry. I think that's more of a remnant from when we were attempting to describe it before, and I think we've all become comfortable with just maker district. So we'll strike that from 129. 183 sounds great. It's a good edit there for the challenge. Page 184, I think maybe takes a little bit more discussion, but we can address, or I can address right now the additional challenge, the additional solutions bullet. We did attempt to, first of all, totally agree, absolutely great idea. Why is it a challenge to rehabilitate these non-conforming structures that are already part of our character in our neighborhoods? And that was what we were attempting to encompass, though perhaps more broadly, in the green bullet above, by identifying regulations that conflict with the specific character and diversity of neighborhoods. My two concerns with how the proposal is now is this better solved by ensuring that the zoning is more correct, rather than saying, fix R4, maybe we just need to find the more appropriate zoning district for these areas. And then secondly, should they be non-conforming? Are we admitting that these are non-conforming, or admitting that this is the pattern of our neighborhood? So a suggestion that I have perhaps to address both these things and incorporate, stronger language recognizing the variations in our housing types would be, after that first sentence of that green bullet, two bullets up, to talk more about specifically, legalize and ensure that continuation of these missing middle housing types is encouraged and protected throughout these neighborhoods as they exist. How do you feel about that?
So, I just, Susanna, so I see where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
I just want it to be very, very clear that, so I just open kimono. I live in a non-conforming house in not in Area 6, but I live in a non-conforming property in Area 7 that's in R4. And frankly, I think it's like a twilight zone. Frankly, the idea that a house that was built in 1931 is non-conforming to the neighborhood makes no sense. I mean, it's literally nonsensical.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And why should you have a hard time maintaining a historic house in your neighborhood, but also is R4 the appropriate zoning there? I mean, I think we've done analysis of that, and those blocks in there can be 12 units an acre and such.
And instead of saying that the zoning district is the problem, or this one asset class, missing middles, need to be addressed, we've identified the problem and mentioned it in a solution, and then together we can formulate how specifically we want to address it. Like, I think there's a couple good ideas coming out of this. Mr. Durham's suggestion about fixing nonconformities, Susanna's suggestion about different zonings, and we've talked about this issue with a couple other things. So keeping it more general at this time, we're acknowledging it as a problem. We will together come to that solution. So we felt good about the more general language that Susanna suggested.
I mean, I'm willing to withdraw this recommended solution if staff confirms with me that at some point there'll be something that addresses this issue of nonconformance of existing structures within R4 zoning areas.
Yeah.
I think that it needs to be addressed in the comprehensive plan.
Right, and we will add that additional sentence to beef up that existing green bullet that specifically talks about non-conforming housing types that are a key pattern of the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Okay. 188 sounds great, we'll make that change. And 194 also sounds great, we'll make that change.
All right, Mr. Durham, anything else?
Well, we just need to go back to the issue of who has standing to determine whether or not a pattern book will apply in the neighborhood, on a street.
There's one-
Yeah, and we've given some thought to that. You know, we think that we've kept it pretty broad. You know, we're not at this point creating the rules for the pattern book. We're not saying that 75% of a neighborhood's within a 2-block radius. Like, we haven't quite set those rules yet, but I think we need to be general to allow ourselves to create those rules to establish those kinds of programs in the future.
I understand where you're coming from, Susanna, but I think what you've done is you by using these words, you've actually said now that property owners will have a say. You haven't defined exactly who will those people be or how it will work, but you said that property owners will have a say. And what I'm suggesting is that I think that the city is setting itself up for potential litigation if you do this, and that the thing that will protect the city is a broadly applied policy that applies to everybody. And because if I'm a resident or if I'm a developer and I want to do infill, and some small section on the street says they want to establish a pattern book, why wouldn't I sue? Because I'd get somebody else who would, who's just outside, maybe around the corner or something, and whose property may actually touch the property and say, why don't I get a say about this? I actually border this property, and you chose this group of people that, just because they're on the same street, they may not even have as much standing as I do because my property actually touches this other property. This is the problem that I think you have. That's going to be extremely difficult for you to come up with the rule set of who can say and who can't say.
I guess our experience, Mr. Durham, in other communities that have set up these kind of conservation districts is that they give property owners the ability as a group to have a say about the process when it's first established, that there is a democratic involvement that is, it avoids the circumstance of it being sort of a top-down imposition. And it's something that the neighborhood, as we talked to them, was very keen on having. I do understand what you're saying, that it is a narrow path we're trying to tread between something that is legally defensible, but also does give neighborhood, at least a majority of a neighborhood, the ability to sort of create some consensus about some additional level of regulation for their community. To the extent that the commission wishes to leave it more general, that's perfectly fine. When we ever get to a point of a conservation district, we will certainly be revisiting this concept again. It will and can come up and can be considered part of the aspect of such a proposal as it goes forward. We don't need to definitively and finally decide that now in this document. We can just simply say a conservation district is an appropriate tool. But it's something that we felt we should be giving the neighborhood some sense that they would have a say in the process.
So Chuck, I may be entirely off base with my comments, but if you take my recommendation and you delete that phrase, it doesn't restrict you from having this sort of process that you're talking about when the policy is implemented.
I agree. I don't think it keeps us from doing it. It's just, fair warning to everybody. We definitely want this to be a grassroots kind of effort. We're not a staff. I don't think we would not be comfortable bringing to the council a proposal to initiate the creation of this overlay district unless there was a groundswell of interest expressed from the neighborhood, and that we could demonstrate that, because we don't want to get in front of them on this kind of thing. But that being said, I turn to the 5 commissioners in the room, see if anybody else has any thoughts about this.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think we have to worry about the wording on this, because a comprehensive plan has no legal effect except to guide general development, and for projects being consistent with the comprehensive plan. It would all lie in the zoning ordinance, so I don't think there's any problem.
Thank you, Mr. Pates. Anybody else? Any other comments, Mr. Durham?
I don't have any additional comments. I mean, if this is problematic, it's fine to leave it in. I just reiterate that taking it out certainly does not preclude staff with continuing with developing language in the zoning ordinance that implements some sort of democratic process to implement these additional restrictions.
Okay, so I just want the commissioners to understand, so I'm hearing two positions. So the position initially presented by Mr. Durham was a change in the language, but then I heard Mr. Pace's position basically say, hey, realistically, the current language really does not affect what would go on based upon the comprehensive plan.
I'm comfortable with, for that one, the way it's written. I think it's okay.
Any thoughts, sir? Okay.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So the way the language is written right now, we're basically in agreement. All right, Mr. Durham?
Oh, yeah, great. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. So since that's the consensus of the commissioners, then I'll withdraw that recommendation.
All right, sir, thank you very much. As noted. That was all of them, correct? Okay, so,
Yes, sir.
all right. Any other commissioners have comments about the Area 6 plan? Mr. Pates? All good? Okay?
No.
All right, so I'll entertain a motion at this time.
So I move that we adopt the changes that have been presented in this in the comprehensive plan as described here, with the additional notes that we just discussed.
I'll second that.
All right? Cast your votes.
Mr. Chairman?
I got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's open for
It
discussion.
is open for
Yeah.
discussion.
I went back and watched some of the tape from our last meeting, and I certainly don't want to repeat or reiterate anything that was said last time. But although I think there are a number of good features in this plan, I plan to vote against it. Because I think as a whole, I think the plan will encourage higher density, particularly for the receiving properties. I disagree with the staff that I don't believe that this will have the effect of simply transferring density from one property to another, because I think that a lot of the sending properties would not be developed residentially anyway. So I think the net effect is going to be increase the density, and I think it is inappropriate to have it along Route 1. I think that the plan as written and as amended doesn't do nearly enough to limit incompatible infill development or to protect the residential neighborhoods. It's still tied to TDR, which I have serious concerns about, and I think that the Fall Hill neighborhood has come out against the TDR concept in this area, and I support their position on it. So those are my reasons for voting against it.
Other comments, discussion?
I just wanted to comment that I am also concerned with some of the density in certain areas, specifically around the Highway 1 corridor. You know, one of the things I want to champion is safety, and I'm just concerned with that. But I think overall this is a good product that staff has put a lot of effort into. And if this moves us down the road to getting some more things for the city of Fredericksburg, I want to support it today.
Any other, Mr. Bates, anything else? Anybody else? Mr. Durham, you have any comments? Just any more discussion?
No, I do not. Thank you.
All right, I think we can move forward. Cast your votes.
Are we voting now?
Yes, sir. Your vote is?
Okay. I vote aye.
All right, so the motion passes, carries 5-1. Thank you, sir. Moving on. So, Mr. Pates, we did have one addition to the agenda this evening, and it is the annual report. So we'll move to the annual report at this time. And Mr. Craig.
Thank you, sir. And this is my fault, it's not on the agenda, because I forgot to include it. But we transmitted the annual report to you all. I believe at the meeting in November, maybe the second meeting in November, the plan, or the annual report is a tool. We've done it 2 years now, this is the third year. And we're still working through the structure of it, but we think we've got a good product for you all to use. It's a status report of planning in the city of Fredericksburg. We are looking for you all to endorse it, and we will transmit it to the city council along with a letter from you all, a cover letter. I believe Mr. Pates wrote one, I believe Mr. Hornung wrote one, and that letter is used by the city council to prioritize their budget in the upcoming year. So it's a priority to try to get it done quickly, and every year our goal is to get it done earlier and earlier. So today, if you all have read through it and you have any questions or comments, we're happy to talk through that stuff. We can address anything, and then we'll probably want to talk about the letter. I think that maybe Mr. Gann is working on that. Maybe he's reached out to some other folks to work on that with him. So we can answer any questions about that, or come up with a plan on how to get that moving forward to the city council as well. So I'm happy to take any questions at this time. And that's what I know.
So let me begin by saying I know that we've had the annual report for a little while. Maybe we did not prepare to discuss some of it. So, I mean, it is open right now, and I know that may have caught some folks a little bit off guard. So I'll take that into consideration also. All right?
I just have a couple.
Sir, Mr. Rodriguez.
Yes. I think let's see, what page is this? Page 6, I think. There's not 16 employees and 2 part-time staff, is there? In your guys' departments with the planning services and building services division?
That's what was in the report.
Is
Yep.
it? Okay.
Yep.
I didn't know if that was a duplicate or if that was legitimately.
Yeah, no, I think.
I haven't
yeah.
seen everybody.
Yeah.
I know they're out there.
Yes, sir, I believe.
And someday
there's-
they'll be all on the 3rd floor. Right?
Yeah, you don't see the building staff. I mean, we're kind of
Okay.
50-50 split that way.
All right. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't a duplicate.
Yes, sir.
And then my only other comment, I think, in the packet that we produced, there are 2 pictures that are side by side, and let me tell you what page that is.
Page 12.
Page 12, yes. These 2 projects are not in the long-range planning document as of right now, or I didn't see it.
These 2 pictures came from the Area 3 Small Area Plan.
Okay.
So we were just looking for pictures. What we did with the pictures this year is wherever we had white space, what we really wanted to do was get you guys this. This is a list of the capital improvements that are listed in the report, and this is the format that it came in, you know, so.
I just, my general comment was if we're going to talk about capital improvements, we should actually talk about ones that we've agreed and moved on doing.
Yeah, these are both in your plan, in the Area 3 plan. Yep, they came right out of the Area 3 plan.
Okay, but they're not in the, they're in the Area 3 plan, but they're not in the current capital improvement plan that we were briefed by Miss Jet, or not Jet, yeah, Jet. Deirdre.
And that's okay, I'm not 100% sure on that, but if that's the case, this kind of the point of this report is to take a look at what we've got in our plan, and that's why we did this chart. So if you're looking at the chart on page 13,
Okay.
the point of this was to identify things that are capital improvements that are listed in our plan.
Right.
List the comprehensive plan page so that you all can quickly reference that. And as a side note, our comp plans that we handed out, probably out of date at this point. We are working internally on getting you guys updated comp plans with all the stuff that we've approved. At this point, we won't have the Area 6 plan in there, but we're going to get the numbering system such that we can just plug it in and plug it out. We're going to get those to you hopefully by December 21st. But anyways, back to the chart. You've got the projects listed on the left. The middle column is the comp plan page where they appear. Then the next column is whether or not they're in the CIP. So this is an excellent point. And the point of all this is for you all to decide as a group whether in your letter we want to say, hey, let's bump up construction of the new fire station to FY 2018, just as an example. I know we're already past that or whatever. Let's see, we don't have anything here for public acquisition of upstream riparian lands. Let's get that in the CIP, write that in to the city council. So this is a little bit of a different format, but that was what we thought maybe would be helpful in kind of crafting this letter and helping, us as a group kind of be more direct with what we're, how we're implementing the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
have a comment on this particular topic. So I appreciate the effort that's been going into this. One of the things that I think is missing here on capital improvements is our pedestrian safety initiatives on our roads.
Mr. Durham, is that?
I know in the capital improvement plan there aren't any. It's not a focus there.
Okay.
But I believe in the downtown area, especially that there are there's a need to improve pedestrian safety along our streets.
Mr. Durham, what types of features would you be looking at?
So it could range from very inexpensive things, which, like here, I'm in Salt Lake City, and they have these, the thing they have here is they have on each side of the road where the sign is that says crosswalk, they have a bucket, and they've got red flags, and people grab the red flag and they walk across the street holding a red flag so that they're more visible. So that's the cheap way to do it, but some of the crossings, for instance, on William Street and others, I believe that we ought to install things like a signage in the middle of the street that lights up when a button is pressed, that just gives a warning to oncoming traffic that pedestrians who have the right of way are crossing.
Mr. Durham, I
It's
think.
not a stoplight. It's not a stoplight. It's just like a flashing yellow light sign type of thing.
Mr. Durham, this is Chuck Johnston. I know Public Works has those kinds of projects sort of queued up on a variety of locations. The nature of those projects actually sort of falls below the radar of what is considered a capital improvement. That is, capital improvements are much more expensive, more all-encompassing kinds of projects. We could certainly reference those as the kinds of things, but I do know that as part of just sort of general safety and operational activities, they're addressing it.
Yeah, I understand that an individual crossing isn't gonna move the meter, but if you were to gather all these things into one, they may. So, for instance, let's say there are 20 of these things across the across the city that we were interested in doing after somebody actually did some analysis to figure out where ought to be installed, and then so we shouldn't just limit those to maybe there needs to be an additional crosswalk installed where one doesn't exist, or maybe there's some traffic calming on certain roads that needs to be done, maybe with painting and that sort of thing. That again, you add it all up, it may end up being somewhere that falls within this. But again, if nobody's looking at it, then it's just going to continue to fall under the below the radar.
Well, they are looking at it. We can highlight that, add it to the document in some appropriate spot, but I believe they are doing it, but it doesn't fall on this particular list. But we can highlight those kind of activities because I think they're valid.
If I can bump you back to the chart on page 11. So this was the second kind of feature we tried to build it in. This is a list of all the transportation improvements in the plan. And I thought I read what you're asking about in here, so that's why I wanted to draw your attention to this. So what we did was we broke them down into regional projects and local projects, listed the comprehensive plan page again, and then tried to assign the appropriate funding source. The regional stuff is going to come through the FAMPO long-range plan, and we're going to be looking for federal and state funding. But then the local stuff, which I think is what you're talking about, should come from the capital improvements plan. So I know number one, I would have to go back and look. Well, here it's listed over on the right, the budget page number of the funding status. So that's the VCR Trail Bridge, Idlewild Connector and Embry Dam, and the Kensington Connector. That's all trails. I think you're talking more specifically about actual street crossings. Yeah, basically like crosswalk improvements. Okay.
Right. Yeah, and for instance, in local projects, number 4 is improved pedestrian crossings at State Route 3 and Gateway intersection. And I would imagine those are more involved projects that would cost a fair amount. So I can see why those might be, separate. But I think there may be a need to have, a project that is improved pedestrian safety at, city crosswalks.
And let me say this to you too. If you look in the comprehensive plan page, we did list the areas when they fell into these land use planning areas, that kind of specific look. We did list those. So that particular one comes from the Area 3 small area plan. So as we go through Area 7, for example, if there is a problematic intersection, and you'll see this a little bit later in the Area 7 presentation, there is some level of improvement that may rise to the level that Chuck's talking about, and it is maybe when we see a problematic intersection itself. So that's certainly something we can work on with the plan as well, and we'll kind of cover that here at the end with what we're looking at in Area 7.
Okay. So my only other comment, and then I'll be quiet, is, and I know the chairman is working on a process to develop the letter, but my only recommendation, and I'm sure he's already thought of this, is that we review last year's letter and we look at those things that those recommendations that council we actually catalog how the council treated our recommendations. So we say in the transmission letter last year's we recommended these things, and we still think these things are important. You didn't take them up, but we still think they're important, or something. So we actually refer back to the previous year's letter when we're writing the current year's letter.
So
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Durham is volunteering to help you write that letter.
I am actually. I'd be happy to help.
thank you, Mr. Durham. And just so you know, Mr. Johnson has provided me with the past letters. So what I'll do is have those sent to the rest of the commissioners. And I've already talked to Mr. Rodriguez with helping, but you too can support the effort of putting together the cover letter. I appreciate it. Okay, any other? So I just want us all to understand. So right now, the cover letter's in progress. I do believe that if you have any further comments, and I don't know that we have them this evening because we did just add this to the agenda. but what is the timeline for completing?
Well, it should be as soon as we can get to it. We can put this on the January 23rd meeting date for action with the letter finalized, and maybe we can look at pictures and
Yeah.
add some text, and we'll respond to the comments.
Okay, is that fine with everyone, January 23rd? Mr. Pates?
Yes, I'm not prepared tonight to discuss this because we didn't have it in our packet, so I haven't been able to go through it yet. But it seems to me that if we do take this up at our January meeting, which is, I believe, something like the 23rd or something like that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that should enable us to be able to put together some kind of report to the council. Do you have any idea at this point, anything that's in the letter?
As far as what I've kind of started framing?
Yeah, I mean, I was just curious
No, I'm
what the thinking is on,
not yet, so I need to send a frame, kind of send an outline to all of you. How about
okay,
that?
okay,
So I'll take that on as an action for myself.
good, thank you.
Let me share, Mr. Page, did you get the hard copy 2 weeks ago? Did you
No.
get it then? Because we did hand it out to everybody then. But you weren't present, that's
That's
right,
right,
you
he
were
was
on
not
the
present.
phone,
See,
that's
I-
right.
I didn't have
Right.
that, yeah,
That's right,
so I'm just seeing it tonight.
that's right,
Yeah.
This was sent electronically by Mike.
right.
Yeah, but we got a hard copy prior to
Right.
the electrons.
Mr. Page was,
That's right. Okay. I think that's all we have for the annual report at this time. Okay. Moving on to item number 5, general public comment. Okay, I see no, not me. Okay. Thank you very much. We're moving on to number 6, other business. Planning commissioner comments.
Mr. Chairman, I was wondering, what's the deal on this market study?
So I believe that,
we're gonna talk about that on item B.
yeah, it's coming up. All right. Mr. Durham, do you have anything?
I do not, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Rodriguez?
I don't think we got an answer about the Christmas party.
So, I'm working, it may not happen prior to, it may be after.
Maybe next Christmas.
No, I won't go, you know what, I won't let it go that far. I can tell you, I'm working on something, but it'll probably be January as opposed to December. Because, thank you, Mr. Page, for catching me off guard with that one, but,
The Epiphany's after Christmas anyway.
okay. But I am going to put something together. I know I have that task, thanks to Mr. Pates. I also need to thank Mr. Beavers sometimes for me being up here, but that's okay, we're all good.
That's the privileges that come with being the
Thank you, I
chair.
appreciate that. Okay, nothing else? Okay, moving on to item 6B, planning director comments.
Mr. Chairman, we wanted to take this time to talk a little bit about where we are with Area 7. Yesterday evening, we had a presentation, and Kamala is going to be passing out the PowerPoint presentation slides from the council session last night. Mr. Rodriguez was there, Mr. O'Toole was there, Mr. Honung was able to be present. It was a good discussion. And David was on remote, yes, I'm sorry, yes, and David was on remote. MIA?
No, it's there.
So you've got this. Call it up?
Computer, please. You were at the end, Chuck.
Right.
The and. But we'll go all the way down there.
I'm not gonna go through all the slides. Campbell, did you pass them out? I'm not gonna go, everybody got one? Okay, I'm not gonna go through all these slides. There is a lot, I know Mr. O'Toole is very
I'd
disappointed.
like to see it a second time.
There's only
They were
56
great
of
the
them.
first time.
But I will go through, just as a general highlight,
I've already got one.
no, no.
See, I got it.
That's good, the
No,
conclusions,
I
that's
want
great.
to go to right at the beginning. There we go. Okay. This is the market report that the Street Sense folks have done. You all got a hard copy of it. We dropped it off on Friday. I'm sure you all read it through every word of it. It is a lot of material. This is not something where we're necessarily, we, the commission, or we, the city council, or we, the city, are voting on. It's not something we're approving. It is simply their analysis that based on their background and knowledge, that we are to use to the extent that it's helpful as we go forward. The report is divided into, obviously, the four sections: residential, office, hospitality, and retail analysis. The thing that Heather Arnold really focused on, the woman who was the lead preparer for the report from Street Sense, was this idea of there being a real estate cycle, that it is not a continuum, that there is there is a wave, if you will, as she described it, of development process, that there are peaks and that there are valleys, and after a valley there's a phase of recovery, a phase of expansion, a phase of a little oversupply, and then a phase of recession, and then it sort of comes back again. She uses this as she talked through the various elements, and the development history that she identified, showing housing stock, she thinks is a reflection of these kinds of patterns of activity in the history of the city, that there are peaks and that there are valleys, which is sort of an obvious economic statement, but it still is indicative of her sense of where we are as a community. She thinks that we've sort of passed a peak, so to speak, and that we're perhaps in a period of oversupply, and that we are somewhat in a valley in terms of additional development at this point in time, but that it will come back again, and that this is a time to sort of prepare. And so her theme was that this was a time of regrouping, resetting, renovating, and preparing for the future. So with that being said, she had some very basic concepts when it came to the residential market, that from the for sale standpoint, she thinks that the market is basically sort of amply supplied, that building more single-family for sale units will bring down prospective values of existing single-family units, that we are at a point of some degree of oversupply in terms of household demand. The rental is just slightly a little bit more positive, that the continued market demand for rental is also going to be absorbed by what's being built, but that as time goes forward, that the nature of our community, being a university town, being a medical center, being proximus to large military bases, all of which have households that do churn through the system and are likely to be renters, does lead her to conclude that the rental market will remain to be a significant portion of what has been true in the community in the past and will continue that way in the future. But that she does think that the nature of the size of households is such that large-scale single-family homes are not going to be the dominant element in the marketplace. And I am providing a very cursory overview here, so there may be a lot more to it. I'm sorry, there is a lot more to it as you can go through the discussion. I think part of the issue of affordability is also related to that size of unit, that the smaller units are somewhat more affordable. The office market, she felt, had some value to it, some strength to it, particularly in the medical component, and this is outside of whatever happens in the VA clinic, that based on vacancy rates, that the medical office is somewhat more strong, that office vacancy rates relative to the general pattern and trend were good. Which is a positive way. It's not as bad as it is elsewhere. That office rates are generally not strong, but were less bad than other places, I guess, is sort of not trying to be Pollyannish about it, but she remarked that many communities would love to have our vacancy rates, particularly when it came to the medical offices. And so this becomes an opportunity that she sees for upgrading existing office space, that a lot of office spaces has some age to it, and so upgrading them is sort of the focus to go. In the hospitality market, similarly, I think she feels as though we have a relatively strong hospitality market compared to other areas or larger trends, that our vacancy rates are relatively low, again compared to other markets. They're not super great, but other communities are having greater challenges than we are. But she does feel that a downtown hotel, sort of a specialty hotel, is something that can be absorbed. And finally, in the retail market, that the nature of retail, as we all know, is changing, and that this is having a dramatic impact, particularly on Central Park. The kind of general purpose retail that is the focus of Central Park is going to be a real challenge as we move forward with that planning process, which is supposed to be starting summer, fall of 2019. So that's going to be a real challenge there. She does think that neighborhood services, that there is a demand for that kind of grocery store neighborhood service activity in various neighborhoods. So she thinks that there is some expansion or improvement activity for retail in that component. That she does think that the pattern of entertainment restaurant activity in downtown is a good one. That question was specifically asked, do we have too many restaurants downtown? And she goes, no. She thinks that the market is still strong with that people are looking for experiential activities, and our downtown provides that unique role, that to get this kind of urban environment, one has to drive an hour to Richmond or Alexandria or Charlottesville or someplace else. And so that we have a strong product to market in our downtown. So, and she concluded with...
Just going to interrupt. She said...
Yes, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, she specifically was asked whether or not there was a problem with restaurants downtown, and she said that Caroline could afford many more restaurants.
And an upscale hotel or something different, like a boutique hotel.
Right. So, and then she just concluded by reemphasizing the whole real estate cycle, and she cited that we were on sort of the right-hand end of that scale, that we were depending on the specific elements, and somewhat of a degree of oversupply, and sort of in a reassessment of the situation, and that though within 4 to 5 years that things will be coming, the market will come definitely on an upswing. I personally, and this is my personal opinion, for whatever it's worth, am a little bit more positive, depending on what happens with the VA clinic decision. All the road improvements in 95, I think, will improve our accessibility. I think there will be some general ripple effect from the Amazon decision. I don't think we're going to have people living in Fredericksburg and working in Crystal City, but I think that that is a big chunk of jobs that will create more business activities, and that there will be a general ripple effect. So I think that I saw a lot of her analysis was sort of looking truly at big picture, sort of national trends, and the kind of projects that happen in our adjoining counties where they build, hundreds or thousands of units in a project, I think definitely would be impacted by those. Our projects are, 20 units or 40 units. I mean, that's a big project for us. I think we kind of fly under that radar a little bit, and so I don't know that we're quite as impacted to that same extent. That said, this I think does provide a general guide to help us figure out how to go forward. It is a lot of information to absorb. I don't expect everyone to have completely gone through that. If any of you want to sit down and talk about any of this, and additionally, please feel free to call Mike or Susanna or myself. We're happy to sort of talk this through. And as you form questions, we can certainly maybe get the Street Sense folks on the phone and talk this a little bit more. But this is intended to be a resource. Let me stop myself there and say if there's any comments or questions at this point, or Mr. Durham or any other, or Mr. O'Toole, or President, have any other comments,
Mr. O'Toole.
what they heard last night?
I was kind of wondering, when you say the document has been prepared for historical purposes or for people that are just going to come here and try to figure out what they want to do as a developer, I'm not sure what the purpose of this document is. I got the feeling the council wanted to use it for different reasons.
Well, I see this as a document talking in terms of specific area plans to sort of to tell us that the general direction of the pattern of development downtown is more or less on the right track. That over the recent years, we've seen much more of a trend of downtown becoming a place of entertainment and restaurants, and it's her analysis that is a positive and appropriate direction. That's not a dead end, if you will. And specifically a boutique hotel, which is something that's been talked about downtown. I think her research and her comments are supporting of that. I think this will be very helpful as we move forward in the Area 1, the Central Park Celebrate. As we sit down with the Rappaport folks, one of the major leaseors of space in Central Park and other property owners, to sort of say, well, you know, our market study is showing that what happened to Toys R Us is not an aberration, that retail is evolving. Now we see Toys R Us is to be taken over by another appliance business, different kind of business, but still in that same general category. And helpful in us as we talk, you know, we see this. What do you see, Rappaport, or whomever, whatever property we want to talk to? Where's your analysis? I think it's helpful. It's also helpful that when and if there's development proposals for neighborhood services like a grocery store, this is going to tell us that's not a crazy thing. That is.
I also saw it maybe being something where someone could say, well, we're at capacity right now in certain elements, and therefore we're going to stop growth. Or
Well,
perhaps for another sideline of that same thing, we could say, well, maybe these people don't need to live in Fredericksburg, they could live in Spotsylvania, like the renters, for instance. I mean, people could take different
Sure.
conclusions from this.
I think how I would use this is if someone new came into the door today, someone that we, you know, not a project that's in process, but someone, you know, was doing a brand new, pardon me, rezoning or special use for residential today, I think we would use this document to say, what's your market analysis? I mean, because we're being told that things are kind of built out here. What are you thinking? Not so much I wouldn't use it. I don't think it's our job or role to squash development, but I think it gives us a basis to ask questions and to understand, well, we don't obviously want something that's going to be successful and it's going to be built, and so it gives us a basis upon which to ask appropriate questions. And by us, I include you all in that as well, not just staff, but commissioners, everybody, to sort of say, well, tell us about your thinking here. Why are you proposing these 500 more units? I mean, you know, we've got a lot of units in the pipeline. Our market analysis says this is we're really meeting the market now. How is your project going to be different? And to understand that, I think that's how I would use it.
Mr. Pace.
I had two questions. Oh, David, go ahead.
Yeah, Chuck. As I recall, maybe you could talk to this, but the analyst, she was pretty clear that this is a product that Street Sense planners are going to be using to produce additional products for the city. Can you characterize some of that work?
Well, as I just was indicating, you know, it's going to be used to help explain why certain land uses are continue to be encouraged in downtown or discouraged in Central Park and or discouraged in other neighborhoods. So one of the main reasons why we felt comfortable with going with Street Sense to do all this work is because they provided an in-house reality check. You know, we did not want to hire someone to say, hey, let's build more breweries. That'll be great. Isn't that a great use? And yeah, generically, you know, breweries sound like a great use, but is there a market for them? I mean, we didn't want someone to say, hey, you know, you need to be planning more single-family home development in a particular area or whatever. But this document is saying from a reality check standpoint, from a market standpoint, that may not be economically a viable option to do. So this is intended to give a reality check to whatever specific proposal either is coming forward in a planning document or coming forward in a land use application.
Anything else, Mr. Durham, before I go to Mr. Pates? Okay, Mr. Pates.
I had two questions. First of all, I haven't had a chance to look but a few minutes at this report so far. How did they treat the region in terms of the city versus the 250,000 people or more who are in this immediate area? And that's my first question. And the second one is, what about population trends? How does that tie into this?
They focused a lot of their regional discussion on the retail area. That's where the regional analysis in terms of primary and secondary and tertiary market areas was the real focus in there. The other focuses, the other topics, residential office and hospitality, were handled sort of in a very general regional way. They weren't necessarily city focused or regionally focused. It was just speaking of general market trends, if you will. But the retail really did have breaking down primary, secondary, tertiary as you read through that. And from a population standpoint, they were focusing more on market trends as opposed to population. They did not do population projections.
I think
I mean, there's numbers in there, but that wasn't.
They took population trends and created annual households
Right.
Generated.
Right.
Then they took the
Right.
amount of entitlement that we have currently, all the projects that we've seen rezonings on that have been gone through, and they factor all those in, and that's how they came up with what's in the pipeline, what our annual household formation will absorb, and then when the charts start to diverge again, and that's what the numbers that you see in the housing section of the report that say, hey, in 4 years you're going to have this many new households formed that need housing. That's what they did with population numbers.
So what are their population sort of projections for the next 4 or 5 years for the city?
They have an annual growth rate, and I'd have to get back in the technical appendix to see that again, but they use census and other metrics like that. But it's continued growth, and I think Heather did a good job of explaining it last night. I'm going to try to say what she said, which I think was they took the existing breakdown of our demographics in terms of where we are with the type of household and population in terms of age and other things, and kind of track that out. And that's the numbers that we got.
Because, in terms of the region, yes, the region, I think, is subject to certain macro trends generally, but there's a real difference among these localities. And it seems to me from a planning perspective, that's something we need to think about a lot. And I was just wondering whether you thought that this report was helpful in that regard. It doesn't sound like to me that they really went into that much. Like, for example, I mean, in terms of your population trends, who's moving to the city as opposed to Spotsylvania? I mean, I'm sure somebody's done some work on that or thought about that. I don't know.
But can I just expand upon what Mr. Pates just asked, though? Because as you were speaking, I was still trying to determine what is a good core here, because you kind of talked about the transient nature. Military base, here's the hospital, here's the college. But realistically, when you start looking at those demographics, what is the core? Because you got to have a core to sustain. And, the transient nature, I mean, it's no different than renters. Do they really take care of what we have and what we want to continue to build? I mean, as you have all these transient aspects coming in and out. And I guess that's what got me. I just didn't understand what that ratio or what a good core looks like.
Yeah, and
That's what
Heather
I'm
did
getting at.
speak to this a little bit last night. I'm not gonna be able to quote it specifically 100%, but something like the average household has lived in the area at least 10 years, which is actually very high, considering the fact that we do have a large influx of transient populations for all the reasons we've discussed, and is higher than she would have expected for us. So the core that we do have is very dedicated to its community, which makes us a very interesting place for sure.
And the other interesting core thing, you're just kind of sparking thoughts. The other interesting core thing that I think they did talk about were our industries, and our main industry is medical. And that what they observed with the medical community, much like some of our other industries like education, whether it's professors or students, and the military, which are all big parts of our economy, which is good because our economy is good, are relatively transient. So they didn't feel the need to kind of make a special calculation to kind of diverge from existing trends. The core, if I'm hearing you right, I think the core is the core for a reason. And our demographics are reflected that for a reason, why people are living in the city of Fredericksburg, and they just kind of expected that to continue. So I don't know if I'm helping or
But
not.
I mean, I guess one of the things that we've spent a lot of time discussing is, single-family, townhomes, apartments. Why are we building more apartments, but this, townhomes, or we really aren't focused on a lot of single-family, whether they be, a regular house or semi-detached. We really are focused on transient-type projects. I mean, when you think about it. So, I mean, are we, at some point if we're past the peak, but we're still building in that area for transient, I mean, we do stand, I think, a bit of a risk of what does it look like when you only have a small population that's sustaining it. Whether and when you look at the college and you look at, the hospital, I mean, nice sizes, but still, you still need those folks that are going to sustain what that looks like. And, if it's better in Richmond or in DC, and we're kind of stuck in the middle, I mean, okay, it's okay to be a farm club sometime, but you got to get to a point where you're a player also, a major player, whatever that may be for us.
I would add to that, a market study like this, I think, is very useful, particularly if you're in the real estate business. But a locality also serves to drive the market. And I don't think we should ever underestimate our ability to influence markets. And so it's kind of a two-way street. We don't just reflect today's real estate market. I think we can also guide and direct development in a way that we want to encourage. That's all.
No, I mean, I think it's an informative product. How about that? Okay. And it just depends on, as Mr. O'Toole has pointed out, what you want to use it for, because you can use it for many different things, and it just depends on what we want to get out of it. So, no, it's good. But I would like to ask, whether you send it to me in electrons or whether you give me a hard copy, I do want those technical indices, though,
Yes, sir.
because those are always interesting. What did they use in order to come up with some of this?
And the hard copies, the big thick book that you got there in there, that one, that's mostly technical appendices.
Okay.
The first 70 pages are the report, and then the remainder is the technical appendices.
Okay.
So you'll see everything about population, everything else that they used. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in this report. Mr. Pates, I think your comment is very well put. The locality can drive the market. And some of the things we've been talking about in terms of zoning, our zoning in a lot of ways has legalized two things: single-family homes and apartment buildings, typically garden apartment buildings. And there hasn't been a whole lot in between. Now we're talking about different types of housing, single families in a court, which we have in this city, that are not currently part of our real estate market. One thing this report is saying is that smaller unit sizes are something to be interested in, based on the people in your industries that are moving here and the households that are going to form. So that's the kind of things that I think that we could have real good conversation about. If we really want to talk about how to do alternative for sale product. If that's what we want our households to form that way, we need to look at the market, what's legal and what's not. And we live and breathe this, so if we're ever way too down in the weeds on it, that's why.
But it's interesting that there's so many varieties of housing, and it seems to me that there may be certain types that we as a city should be favoring. My wife's in the real estate business, and she's observed things recently that I think are very, very interesting, and that is about young people and what they're looking for, what they're able to afford, and do we want them? And one area that I think may be very promising for the city is that young professionals are very interested in living in the city of Fredericksburg, particularly downtown, but they can't afford but so much, And so it could be that maybe there's some way that we could encourage more small size condominiums, because I think that might be a particular market that would fit in with our community. It would attract, I think, good, stable people who plan to stay, perhaps, and it would be something that they can afford. So, I mean, it's just that type of thing, whether that's what we wanted to do or not. But I think that we can maybe use this stuff to get some better ideas on the types of housing that we want to encourage.
She
It's
actually.
also affordable.
If I may, that discussion actually was held. In fact, the mayor specifically asked about her opinion on the encouragement of missing middle type structures, and she was very positive about that being an opportunity for the city. And Chuck, or Mike, if I'm misstating that, if you wouldn't mind commenting.
No, I think you're accurate.
Well, I believe we got a lot more to come. We're still working, area plans. I mean,
Right,
some of these
and
facets
Actually,
come
if
out.
we could transition over, and Mike wants to talk a little bit about some high-level ideas that we've been getting from the Street Sense folks, and so just kind of take 5 minutes to kind of go through those so you get some sense of where we're going with that.
I'm going to zoom back up to the top of this and ask for the computer one more time. Chuck put it well. This is a high-level view of where Street Sense is. Just up front, what we're doing here is showing you where we are in process. We are going to get a draft, hopefully, of their work product to distribute to you all in January. And then we're going to take that on a tour of different boards and commissions, Main Street ARB, other groups like that have a vested interest in this, and start collecting comments, then which we can transmit to Street Sense. So that's where we are. They are finalizing their reporting phase, step 3. After we work together on looking through that, they'll move on to finalizing the report. But what I'm going to do now is give a bit of a presentation of where we've gone. That's step 1 and 2, analysis and charrette. Where we are currently, which is 3, reporting, articulating the vision that came out of those 2 steps. And we kind of talked about the 4th step, finalizing. That's all in process. So where we've been, we did a lot of public outreach on this project. We prioritized it in the contract that we did with Street Sense. So what you see here are examples of a couple of exercises that were undertaken on the public level. We had a survey that was made available online. The results are encapsulated in the type of diagrams you see on the left, and also on the next slide too, which I'll show you in a second. They have captured all those results and put them into this form, which makes it very visually understandable, which is, again, Street Sense is a really good firm, and this is the kind of thing that they do very well. On the right, you see that placemat exercise. I think you guys all did that. A lot of people in the community did. I know that Chuck, Susanna, and I all attended different events around downtown and forced people to do placemats at an uncomfortable table on a sidewalk. I think some of you guys did that too. So that they've consolidated that, and what you see on this screen, which is very, very interesting, these are the green is, hey, these are the things that that are my core reason for being in downtown. And then the things in red are, I perceive this as a challenge. And you start to see that there are some challenges concentrated on this map. So again, the way they were able to accumulate this data and then the way it's reported out is a good starting point for their team to start focusing in on issues. These are just samples too. This isn't all of the data, and we've got it all. If you guys are interested, you want to see it. This is some of the results of the survey. Questions like, what brought you to Fredericksburg? Question 14 in the bottom right. I can easily find my way around downtown, and just gauging people's responses. This is the kind of stuff that they can only get by getting other people's perspectives. At the same time, the consultants were digesting reams of information that we provided to them, all the plans that we could put our hands on that had been done in the past. They were on site here in the city, evaluating infrastructure, and they were holding meetings with our utilities department, our public works department, with our transportation administrator, and talking to folks like Fred Transit and other people like that. And so this is the kind of outreach that we did before we got to the charrette. And what that preliminary research did was generate these preliminary site analysis. So this was the accumulation of that original groundwork led to these types of diagrams. And this is what we took to the charrette. This is what we started with at the charrette. So you see a site conditions map on the left. This neighborhood identity, they called it a Goucher map after a neighborhood in Baltimore where they first did this. I think this is one of the most telling tools that they produce, and they've done it in all our other areas as well. Just based on the community input, what they find, these gray areas are areas that are undefined. The red area, everybody knows what that is. The green blob down there, people have an identity and association with that. These yellow areas, that's where we live. These blue areas are corridors, but there's these areas of the downtown that are question marks. You got a site topography, surface 6, 7, 8, put this together to understand the natural systems. And you have a preliminary regulating plan. We'll talk more about what they're doing with the final regulating plan, which is one of the primary tools in the downtown. But just based on when they came up here and their original impressions, that's what they took all this to the charrette. And that was step 2, the charrette. And talking to them, what I've heard them say is that every planning effort starts off with, what are we going to change? What's going to be different? And the thing that they and we found during the charrette in Fredericksburg is that there's a collection of assets in the city that comes up over and over again that we don't need to change or make completely different. But what we want to focus on is, how do we upgrade these list of assets? And these are the ones they identified: historic commercial district, walkable streets, riverfront, public space, the train station, retail nodes in priority areas, and our residential building stock, and the variety of that. That's things that we have that other localities plan to try to achieve. They try to change to get that, and we've got it. So the focus coming out of the charrette, which we had a great public response, and I saw all you guys there, and through the week, all this input, the preliminary steps, and the interaction that we had during the charrette led to the creation of these charts. And they were doing these on site during the charrette, and then they posted them on the wall on the last day and gave a presentation on them. And this was the theme that evolved out of it all, is upgrades. We've got these systems, how do we upgrade them? Transportation upgrades, which you see on this page. Vehicle circulation is something to look at. Neighborhood character, multimodal connections, that's kind of the middle map, and walkability, so the map on the right. What is our pedestrian system, and how are we going to upgrade that? So they just started to map general concepts. And just 2 interesting snippets that I heard. This is my personal experience during the charrette from folks. I heard this twice from 2 different people. Was plan for people, not cars. I love that. I thought that was great, and I think it's very relevant anywhere else in the city. It's most relevant here, though we're trying to do that in other areas too. Jim loves that. I see him smiling over there. That's great. And we've been planning for cars for years in most other areas. The other thing I heard that I thought was very interesting, and seeing it here in their maps, whether or not our roads are at capacity for cars, you could have that conversation. They're not. But even if they were, they're nowhere close to meeting the capacity that they have to accommodate bicycles, transit, and pedestrians. That's fascinating. So when they're looking at what our roads are, they're looking beyond just the yellow double stripe line and parallel parking spaces. These are all were the Charette products. So you guys have seen this. This is nothing new, but it's a good recap of how they're moving forward, what they're using to move forward. They started to chart our open space network. We've got a good view of the entire city at this point, but they've focused in on the chart on the left, open space upgrades. They're cataloging that and they're putting that into some features. They haven't finished that yet. That's a piece they're still actively working on. The riverfront was a big piece of this. It started with this riverfront activation idea here, and you'll see that is one idea that they've gotten pretty far on. And then the original transect kind of understanding that they were working on the Charette, the dark core being the core of the core, the dash lines being these areas that look like maker districts, the light being real residential, and then the purple being this general kind of urban. So this was the Charette products that came out of this. And from that, we move on to step 3, reporting. This is where we are today. And this is really the point of this presentation, so thanks for bearing with me. And let me see if I can catch myself up here. We're going to start compiling the report. Okay. The first major component is going to be our transect map. And that is what you see here. This is where they are currently with the transects. Now let me go through what is on this map. It does contain a new transect that wasn't part of 3 and 6, and it's called T5, and that's this area right here in the purple. And it does not align with our commercial downtown zoning district. It's smaller than our commercial downtown zoning district, which is interesting. We've got T5s that are calibrated. We have T5C, which is our corridors, our shopping center toolkit. We've got T5M, which is our maker toolkit along the Princess Anne corridor. They're calibrated with that last letter, and they represent future walkable urban places. This is the pure T5. There is no letter. There is no calibration. This is Fredericksburg's existing walkable urban core. I don't know that we'll see this again, but this is, when we're looking at our city, what our city is. And our other places that we want to bring up to this level for all the sustainable reasons and making walkability a reality in other areas of our city are calibrations off of this. So I think that's one interesting thing here. You see these two areas. They do have the two T4M transects. This is a natural extension of the Canal Corridor, Mr. Rodriguez. And interestingly, the group that we've been meeting with has been talking about this as well. There's a lot of good uses down there already, and a few property owners are very interested in being a part of that. And then, of course, the Jackson Warehouse District down here on the map. That area is probably the original Maker District within the core net. Well, probably the second or third original Maker District once the tanneries moved off the river. But that is another one that's shown there. This intermediate purple here, the color scheme is hard to read, guys. I'm sorry about that. Is a T4. It's the general urban kind of transitional along the corridors out of town in this general area down Lafayette, along William out of town. It does cover these apartments here, the Kenmore apartments and the other uses there. So that's where we're starting with that. And then the T3 is the rest. It's the residential neighborhoods. There's no T3E on this map. It's something that's been in other areas, kind of larger lot, single-family homes. This is all the T3 area. And stop me if you have any questions. This tool is the second major component of the plan. It's the regulating plan. So these will be the kind of the primary two starting points for the plan. And a lot of these concepts are still under development, but I'm going to take you through one of them here real quick. But each symbol is going to represent a type of policy. And what I was talking with Mr. Durham about a minute ago is improved intersections. You see those black dots there, and improved pedestrian crossings. Those are the things that we then put into the report that say, hey, this is a capital improvement. Let's move it up or move it back. Either they'll come through stars with the bigger corridors, but on Lafayette, there may not be a stars. We might have to put the money in ourselves. So that's a transportation element. And there will be some description and a transportation page in the report that hadn't been developed yet. You can see this tool about a retail priority area, and they'll get into what that means and why that rises to the level of a regulating plan. They do have these blue lines here, this dashed line along a William and Amelia, and the blue line down here on Caroline and Princess Anne. That represents the circulation upgrades, talking about conversion of those one-way pairs into two-way streets to help slow down traffic, be more compatible with residential neighborhoods. And then you'll see some other tools on here about pedestrian upgrades. And there will be a whole breakout of what those tools mean. And the next slide, I think, is saying, that they're still working on those here. But the one I want to point you to, you've got a bank trail here, okay? And these beacons, riverfront beacon. And this is a concept I'll take you through and show you kind of how the plan is going to develop and how this will be reported out to you all. So you see it on the regulating map, and then what you'll have is a more detailed breakdown. And it's in a series of layers. So you saw the beacons. They're already adjusting this. This is already yesterday's news. But the concept here is we've got these right-of-way stubs perpendicular to the river that are an underutilized asset. We challenged them with looking at the entire riverfront. We're not replanting the riverfront park. The riverfront park is the riverfront park. We're not going back there. It's all over. So what else along the riverfront? What else are we doing along the riverfront? So this is one concept, and it's a means to bring people to these spaces that are underutilized to improve the understanding from the general public that, hey, there is a river here, because that's a challenge right now. It was one of the biggest challenges identified during the charrette is that we've got a riverfront and nobody knows about it. And if you're a visitor to downtown, you don't ever see it. But this is also an amenity that's for local folks as well. So you've got this concept of having some type of monumentation along the riverfront. They like the light concept. They like driving along River Road, looking across the city and seeing the lights. They like that it ties the whole riverfront along Caroline Street together. We're also asking them to look at Canal Street for the reasons I'll show you in the next slide. So you've got that one layer there. Building on that, riverfront activation strategy. So what else do we have along the river? We have the opportunity to build a trail along the river, a bank trail, so that's part of their planning. They're planning access points to that trail. How does it function within our street network? And then these green arrows, with the topographical challenges, with the property ownership challenges, realistically, how do we tie this in to our remaining trail network? So that's kind of the level of planning that they're at. There's some minor engineering involved to check feasibility. We don't want to bring an idea to you guys that's going to fall apart as soon as someone looks at it. So that's what they're doing. I will draw your attention to these blue dots here. These are opportunities or existing water access. There's been interest in adding access here at Canal Street. There's history there. It was a ferry operated by John de Baptiste. I got it right. And there's been some discussion from folks that live in that area about reestablishing river access there. And when StreetSense started looking at how the riverfront worked, what we noticed was if you start having these points of access, all of a sudden you see this dashed line here. It opens this entire section of the river for people to start here and paddle here. Start here, paddle there, or paddle upstream if you're really strong, I guess, there. So this is an underutilized asset that we've got sitting right here, and how do we upgrade that? So that's level 2 of this strategy. So first, monumentation and just realizing that we've got this stuff too. We've got some pretty fine-grained improvement or just an understanding of what on a micro level we can do along that riverfront. And then the third level of planning that's going on with these type of facilities is what does it mean in the big picture? This is the open space network I was talking about before that we've got mapped. The pink are our existing trail network. The biggest issue with our existing trail network is it's disconnected. So not only do we have this concept of activating our riverfront and tying it into the downtown, but it's also serving potentially as that link. And that's what you see represented. The green arrows that were on that screen are these green arrows here. We'll have to figure out how to get those up to the Heritage Trail. It's going to be something on street. We already know that people are sensitive about parking, so we've got to figure that out. What does that mean? And again, I'll bring you back to that comment about what is the capacity of our roads. Another concept they've got here in red is a trail along Hazel Run. We've got a ton of open space down there that's underutilized, and there's an RPA there as well. If you remember the Highlander project, which is probably coming back to you all for their preliminary plat, we did the rezoning last year, maybe the year before. They have a concept for a trail along there, and just build right off of that and keep it going. If you get down to this area here, there's several things that can happen. You have the Bankside Trail here. I'm getting way ahead of myself. So this is the Bankside Trail, and if you start to bring it down here to the City Dock Park, and you go up Rocky Lane and go out Caroline Street, this is all open, vacant city land, and you've got a potential for a trail connection here, and you've got the physical potential. You can cross Hazel Run, you can go under that Route 3 bridge, and all of a sudden you're into Dixon Park. And so this is kind of the big picture level work that they're doing with these improvements. So it's a very detailed concept on one hand. It's a look at the downtown riverfront as a second step, and then how do we make this function on a citywide level as well. So that's one concept that is kind of built right now. They are doing this type of work with, let me show you this slide that I skipped, with these other concepts as well. You saw the open space diagram, the pedestrian system diagram where they had the colors, tertiary, secondary, and primary, and what does that mean in terms of sections. Vehicular circulation, there's more focused engineering type of work to do there. Alternative transportation is an interesting one. One concept that I'm not sure where it is or that was talked about is more of a circulator downtown. So we're looking at that currently, and you've seen riverfront activation. The third part of this plan that we don't have now that they're working on as well is concept focus areas, train station, the riverfront. You've kind of seen where we're going with the riverfront. But Lafayette Boulevard to the west is one area, if you remember the red dots, that kind of, I'll show them to you one more time. These red dots indicating let's do some intervention here and find out what we can solve here. What are the problems going on there? Focus area. So we're going to look at that. And now my slides are faster than my slides. And then the Wolf and Jackson Warehouse District. A lot of those tools we've kind of established with the maker districts. It's not going to be too dramatically different. Corridors and nodes. What about historical buildings there? Those are the questions that we'll be kind of looking at with that. We talked about riverfront activity. We've gone through this stuff. That's a lot. This is an update. Just to reiterate where we are, we're hoping to bring a draft with more concepts fully fleshed out to you all in January. After that, we'll be working with Main Street, ARB, Arts Commission, Memorials Commission, anybody that we can get in front of to show this to folks so they've got an opportunity to discuss it. Have one last round of comments with Street Sense, get a good draft, and then have them come back down for hopefully a public meeting to get the draft back before the public in late February or early March. That is our working schedule for right now. So I'm happy to take any questions you guys have about that.
Please.
What special role does the Planning Commission have in this?
Special role. You guys are the Planning Commission. You're the primary point of contact for this report. We're going to you first and going to spend the most time on this with you. How do you all interact with Street Sense and their contractual obligation with the city? Once we have that draft, we're going to ask you all to do a detailed review of that in January, get our comments, and we want to try to get them done, get good, strong comments at that point, so that when we send things back to them, you've had that opportunity to really be part of that. And I'm emphasizing this because what I'm learning, managing this group and how the consultant budget is working is we need to maximize our time together with them. And I think that's our opportunity. So that's kind of what I'm envisioning now. And we will have other work sessions and meetings with that. We were going to have that public meeting in March or late February. And yes, sir, that's kind of what.
Well, the reason I was asking is, I mean, it seems to me that, you know, of all the different groups in the city, the Planning Commission, I think, should have, needs to have a major role in this. And I think it would make sense for us to have a work session with Street Sense as soon as we can.
That's why we're here today, right now. That's part of that process. Street Sense is not coming down for a work session with the Planning Commission.
That's too bad.
I mean, they're not.
I think it
mean,
would be
we're-
very
we're-
useful.
We're the planners who you guys are working with. And we use them to sort of give us concepts and ideas, but it's ultimately, we all have got to own the plan. And so it's not Street Sense's plan, it's all of our plans, planning staff's plan, planning commission's plan. So we will work with you, and we are right now. I mean, we haven't given this presentation to city council. I mean, that's, you guys are the primary point that we're contacting. That's why we're doing this right now.
Well, I think it would be very nice for us to be able to talk directly, all of us together, with Street Sense, I think, as this plan moves forward, because now they're coming to the culmination of their ideas along with the city staff. But I think that it would behoove us to have an intense discussion at this stage and not wait until we have a public hearing. So,
And that's our intent. We intend to have these conversations. They may not be physically present, but you're talking to your planning staff.
well, why shouldn't we have them present?
Why? Because you have us. I mean, that's what we are here for, is your planning staff to sort of work these things through with you.
I mean, I just gotta ask, Mr. Pates, what do you think the gap will be by us not having a conversation directly with Street Sense?
Well, I mean, it's just like any other project. If you hire an architect to construct a major building for you, it makes sense for the client to talk directly with the architect. And I think that the various viewpoints that we could get would be very helpful to us. And that's all.
And if I could say something, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right, that getting y'all's perspective and having more public input is essential to this planning effort, and that's why we wanted to give you the steps 1 and 2 here. We spent a lot of money on that. It was not cheap to run that 5-day charrette. We're cheap, relatively speaking, and so not
You said it,
to
I
try
didn't.
to make my point. Street Sense doesn't have a lot of money left on this plan. You know, we're 60-70% through what we budgeted for this. I think it's money well spent. We want to give them room to finish their ideas, because they come up with things, and whether or not we like them or not, we're going to help you get through that. That's where the brake pad or the tire, wherever it meets the road, whatever one, I don't know. But we spent money on public outreach, and you guys took advantage of that. And we're going to do it again with Area 1 too. We're going to spend money on a charrette there, and we got to get in early, you know, with that stuff. So if that's helpful at all.
So, if I may.
All right, Mr. Durrell? Go ahead, Mr. Durrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, so I understand where Mr. Pate's coming from. There have been a couple opportunities to participate directly with Street Sense. Of course, the 5-day charrette is one. The kickoff of the Area 7 planning was another. Then yesterday's session is another. So I look forward to additional opportunities to participate with Street Sense directly. But I also, I think Mr. Pate's intent is good, even if there are some practical reasons why it may be difficult to have direct work sessions with Street Sense, and that is, and staff has already indicated that they want to work with us on this, and I think, and maybe I'm just missing this because it was a little difficult to follow the conversation, especially without the brief in front of me. But if staff could schedule, a series of work sessions with us to discuss how they intend to use the StreetSense products moving forward. I think that might, meet the intent of what Mr. Pate is saying, even if it's not exactly what he's looking for. But I guess the point is that it probably behooves us all to have some opportunities to get together and work on, or at least review some of your products in advance of public hearings. Over.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Slominski?
Yes, I was just going to comment. I appreciate that you guys are cheap. Again, these are tax dollars we're talking about, but I do love in what I saw on basically how we move around the city, how visitors would move around the city, and connecting these paths that, unfortunately, up until this point, don't really connect. Again, Dixon Park is way out there, and it would be nice to bring those in. So I would encourage more of our conversations to be along those lines of how we connect the city better.
Anyone else for staff? Anything else for the staff?
I guess in order to just anticipate the additional discussion, we do anticipate or see that there's going to be a couple of public hearing items on your January 23rd agenda. If you all want to maybe go ahead and pencil in, maybe we could start at 6:30 on the 23rd, and have a little bit of a work session before the regular meeting to have some more time to sort of spend discussing on it. I think by that date we'll have more to sort of talk about. If that's convenient for everybody, if we could focus on maybe the 23rd starting at 6:30 and spend a little bit of time in the early part of the evening, have the public hearings, and if there's additional discussion. The public hearings items, I do not believe are going to be extremely controversial, so I don't anticipate that they will take great amount of time. Famous last words, I know, but let's if you're able to, let's book a little bit additional time on that day if possible.
Mr. Pates?
I would think on the 23rd, we might also try to use some of that work session for the CIP discussion. That's a thought. I think that's going to take some discussion.
23rd is lining up to be quite full.
I don't anticipate us getting much more information out of the city's manager's office about the CIP at that date. I'll just be upfront with you about that. If I could, Mr. Chairman, just going to go through other review of,
yes, sir,
of items coming before you all. In addition to the discussion we had yesterday evening with the council regarding the market study, we also had a brief discussion regarding some potential amendments to the sign ordinance. We're going to be looking at a couple amendments, relatively modest, that would look like the schedule they would be coming to you all at a February meeting. There's been issues with temporary signage, banners. Right now that there is a limit of the time period that they can be up, and then there has to be a break, and then another limited time period and we've had several folks, particularly nonprofits, who want to have like banners like through a summer. So they don't want more total days, they just want to be able to bunch those days together. So we're looking at a way to try to give that flexibility. The council had some hesitancy about it, but we're trying to find a middle ground that can meet needs and but not not unduly make the city unattractive. Council was concerned about that, but there are particularly nonprofits want to bunch the signs. There's been some interest in menu boards being able to be electronically displayed because they do change, not every moment, but they do change maybe a couple times a day, and so there's been some interest to that. Council seemed to be positive about that concept, and similarly, the issue of gasoline signs has come up again, particularly along Route 1, Route 3, that some flexibility there in terms of LEDs, electronic signs may be appropriate there, not in Lafayette or Princess Anne or downtown and not in the corridors, but on arterial highways. So that was something that was talked about. The other items that were talked about of some interest, the Medicorp sign for the Mary Washington Hospital along Route 1. It's a couple hurdles to go through. Council approved on first read a lease agreement for the sign in the right-of-way. The second read will be at the January meeting, and it looks like they'll be acting on the special exception request at that point in time. Council seems to be comfortable with that. The other item that came back, you may recall that the council did vote to approve these special use permits for the 7-Eleven Valvoline on Route 11 with the suggested condition that there be no access out in the Fall Hill. A revised sketch plan was brought back to council for their blessing to allow flexibility of where 7-Eleven and Valvoline would be on the property, with the understanding that there would be no access out to Fall Hill, that there'd be 2 points of access on the hospitality. Council did approve that revised resolution. It looks like the idea is that the 7-Eleven will be right on the corner, and 7-Eleven appears still to be interested despite not having the access out to Fall Hill. Valvoline seems 50-50 on it. So that was acted on also. Mr. Page is leading forward.
As I recall, they said there was just no way they could locate at that location without access to Fall Hill.
I know.
Yeah, it's funny about that,
I
isn't
know,
it?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
We're all remarking on that, yes.
Mhm.
I think that's it, Mr. Chairman. Anything else to add? Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We look forward
All right.
to the festive events Mr. Gant will be organizing.
I will be. Just got to find an open date at the clubhouse. I'm doing that. All right. Thank you for your time this evening, everyone.